Do you have questions on managing insects in your wheat crop? This is Sandra Wick, Crop Production Agent with the Post Rock District of K-State Research and Extension. During our 2023 Post Rock Extension District wheat plot tours, Dr. J.P. Michaud shared information on a couple of wheat insects, including winter grain mites and the brown wheat mites. K-State Research and Extension has an excellent publication called the 2023 Wheat Insect Management Guide that includes these two insects along with other insects. Please let us know if you have additional questions.
Did anyone have any issues with insects at all this spring in the wheat? Anybody notice any problems? Well, I did a few sweeps through the wheat before our walk through here. There's not a lot of insects. A couple of wheat head armyworms and a few lady beetles. And you say, well, that maybe is a good thing, right? There's not a lot of insects, but it's a double-edged sword. Because we really count on our wheat crop to produce a lot of beneficial insects that move out and give us control of the pests in our summer crops. And a lot of this goes unnoticed. You know, if you don't have a pest problem, you don't realize that there's anything out there at all. But in reality, we have a lot of production of beneficial insects, wheat being such a large acreage, being one of the first things to green up, hosts a lot of aphid species, and yet can tolerate a lot of aphids in there but without any effect on yield. So this is a good thing because those aphids are actually, as long as they're sub-economic, are a good food supply for all the things that we want to have in the crop, like lady beetles and lacewings and so on. So they multiply their numbers, and by the time the wheat finishes, you've got a big population of beneficials to move out into the summer crops. So doesn't look like it's going to be a big crop this year of beneficials. However, as we have heard, of course, it's been a very dry year throughout most of the state, and dry years favor certain types of problems. In particular, brown wheat mite is something that we've seen fairly abundant in some fields around Ellis County at least. And brown wheat mite, there's always some out there, but in a dry year where the plants are unable to really grow after they come out of vernalization, that's when you start having some problems. These mites, they'll feed from individual cells on the leaf, and you're not going to notice anything until everything starts turning yellow, and then at that point there's almost at the point of no return. And we really don't have any good miticides registered to control them. And the problem is when you start having damage accumulate from the mites, you really need a rain for recovery to occur. But if you do get rain, then that usually takes care of the mites. So the problem with brown wheat mite is also associated with continuous wheat. The eggs are laid in the soil, and so if you're planting wheat, you've always got some wheat, after wheat, you're always going to have some mite eggs in the soil. And if you have the conditions that are right for the mites to take off and for the wheat to be delayed in growing like it was this year, then you have the recipe for some serious problems. So one of the best management practices is to avoid planting wheat after wheat. Another one is the winter grain mite, which can be a problem in some years. It actually prefers cooler weather, so that one's also, the damage is going to accumulate the same under drought conditions, but this is a mite that will survive better under cool spring conditions. So, but basically that's most of what we've seen in the wheat this year. But in general, again, conditions that are poor for the crop, they're going to be poor for the general insect populations as well.
You tell briefly about these Miller moths that are being populated. I think they move well.
Yes, they do. The Miller moths are interesting because they are also, the wheat is the source of all the Miller moths. Now, they're actually army cutworms. The moths lay their eggs next to suitable plants in the fall. Okay, and a single female can lay up to 1,000 eggs. Those larvae feed throughout the winter on the little seedlings of wheat. And you won't hardly notice the damage because they feed on a single layer of leaves, so they create that window paning damage. So the remaining layer of cells on the leaf will die, and you'll see these little like windows in the leaf. And when it gets cold, they go down in the soil. When it gets warm, they come up and feed. You're really not going to notice anything until about April, when they're all getting to the last instar. And that's, of course, when they do most of their feeding. And they're big. But we can tolerate a lot of those because they're feeding during the vegetative stages. So they're usually finished before the wheat's heading out. And so it's really quite remarkable. We've done studies, we've had an opportunity to study them on the station. We've had as many as 10, 12, 15 worms per row foot without any impact on yield. So, but of course we do get all the moths emerging in late April and May, and they move west. And they're going up into the mountains where they'll spend the hot summer weather in the cool mountains of Colorado, up above the tree line actually, and in such numbers that they're actually important food source for the grizzly bears up there. They only discovered that about 20 years ago. So because they're flying east to west, it's an active migration, kind of like the monarchs moving south and north. They fly below the boundary layer and of the air, and they orient by the moon at night. And so of course your porch lights, any lights on at night, they think it's a moon, and of course flying in a fixed angle to a porch light is going to take you around and around and around. And so that's why they end up around people's houses. If you want to have fewer of them, and of course they get into everything, if you want to have fewer of them, turn off your lights at night. But they're moving through. It'll take them a couple of weeks. I think they're almost done now. So all the ones that produced out east are moving out west. And there's no point trying to do anything about them because the ones that are here today are going to be gone tomorrow. And if you have more, well, they're still passing through.
So last fall, we would have had a large number of larvae, or the adults laying in the eggs.
Well, it's probably more to do with the conditions for the survival of the eggs, because a single female, as I said, can lay 1,000 eggs. So if we have a lot of them in the spring, it's probably because conditions were good for the larvae over the winter.
So it's a pretty mild winter then.
Yeah, it's probably more that than how many moths we had in the fall, because juvenile survival is always usually the big variable.
Okay, great. Alrighty,
I've been getting a lot of questions about should we be concerned this fall about their larvae, or does the number now indicate anything about it?
No, I think you
Can you
find...
repeat that question because we need to hear it for that.
So the question is, since we had a lot of miller moths this spring, are we going to have a lot of eggs laid in the wheat this fall? And I think you really find there's no correlation, because you know how well they survive on their journey up into the mountains and back again in the fall when it cools off. You know, that's a big variable. But the bigger variable, as I just mentioned to Sandra, is how many, well, first of all, where they lay their eggs. They'll actually go into alfalfa as well, but and how well those larvae survive the winter. So most of the mortality is going to be late fall, when those larvae are very small and just trying to start feeding on the wheat seedlings.
Okay, great. Okay, can I borrow your microphone too?
It's still on.
Okay, wait, stick her in here. Okay, I would also like to recognize some of our sponsors that are here, and they are on the front cover there. And I know we have some representatives here, so I wanted to recognize them. We have a big group from CPI, so if you guys are all raise your hands here. Don't be bashful. Yeah, raise your hands. So we thank them. Kansas Wheat Alliance, and that would be Bryson. We also have Central Valley Ag. That would be Denton Lehman. And then we have Midway Co-op is here. So if you guys want to raise your hands too. And then I don't think I missed anybody. Is anybody here from Trinity Ag? Okay. We have Agmark here as well. Okay. Did I miss anybody else? Okay. There are some others listed on here, but if you see these guys, please thank them for continually sponsoring our wheat plot tours here in the wheat demonstration plot program. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next varieties.